I was 72 years old when the police knocked on my door before dawn, and I still remember the way the officer's flashlight beam cut through the darkness of my quiet Oakland street. I'd been sitting alone at the kitchen table drinking coffee, watching the first hints of light creep over the houses in our cul-de-sac where families have lived for generations. The summer heat was already building, and I knew the fan would be spinning all day long, just like it had every day since June arrived. The officer's face was serious, apologetic in a way that made my stomach clench. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "we received a report of a child crying in your basement. We need to check it out." I stared at him, my coffee cup frozen halfway to my lips. "Officer?" I said slowly. "I don't even have a basement." He looked confused, checked his notes, then looked back at me, standing there in the emerald green blouse my late husband had loved so much. I saw the moment he understood. Someone had called in a false report. Someone had deliberately tried to make me look dangerous, unstable, unfit. That's when I knew how completely they'd destroyed everything. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back 8 months to the day my life truly shattered, because you need to understand how I ended up there. How I went from being a grandmother with a home and a family to being a woman with nothing, not even the dignity of being believed when the truth was staring everyone in the face. The truth was simple. My own family had decided I was worth more dead than alive, and they were doing everything in their power to make sure I disappeared quietly, conveniently, and profitably. My modest ranch house with its chain-link fence and small yard had been my kingdom for 40 years. My husband and I bought it in 1981 when this neighborhood was still affordable, when Oakland felt like home instead of a gold mine for developers. We raised our children here. We built a life within these walls. When he died 6 years ago, I stayed because this house held every memory I had of him. Every room whispered his voice. Every corner held his laughter. What I didn't know was that my son was counting those whispers, calculating the value of those corners, and planning how to take it all away from me. It started so slowly I didn't see it coming. After my hip surgery last spring, I needed help. My son Marcus offered to handle my bills, my appointments, my medications. He was so attentive, so caring. I signed the papers he put in front of me because he was my child, my firstborn, and I trusted him the way mothers trust their sons. The first time he brought papers for me to sign, we sat at this very kitchen table. I remember the moment clearly now, though I didn't think anything of it then. He'd brought lunch from my favorite deli, the one on Broadway that makes sandwiches the way they used to 40 years ago. We ate together like we hadn't done in years, him asking about my physical therapy, about my pain levels, about whether I needed anything from the store. "Mom," he said, pulling a folder from his briefcase, "I've been thinking about how hard it must be for you to manage everything while you're recovering. The bills, the appointments, keeping track of medications. What if I just handled all that for you? Just temporarily, until you're back on your feet." I should have asked more questions. I should have read every word of those documents, but he was my son, and he'd brought me lunch, and he seemed so genuinely concerned. So I signed where he pointed, trusting that he had my best interests at heart. I didn't know he'd added himself as a joint holder on my checking account. I didn't know he was transferring money out every week. I didn't know he was meeting with his wife, with my niece Sharon, with my own younger brother Donald, plotting how to get me out of this house so they could sell it and split the profits. The conspiracy was elegant in its cruelty. They started with whispers, family gatherings where they'd exchange looks when I spoke, as if I'd said something confused or inappropriate when I hadn't. Phone calls to other relatives where they'd express concern about my mental state, my memory, my ability to care for myself. They painted a picture of a deteriorating old woman who needed intervention, who needed to be protected from herself. I remember one Sunday dinner at Sharon's house, about 3 months into their scheme. I must have mentioned something about the leak in my kitchen faucet that I'd been meaning to fix, and Marcus interrupted me. "Mom, you told us about that faucet last week," he said, his voice dripping with false patience. "And the week before that, remember? We talked about calling a plumber?" I hadn't mentioned it before. I know I hadn't, but Sharon nodded sympathetically, and Donald looked at me with pity, and suddenly, I was the confused old woman who couldn't remember her own conversations. Marcus's wife, Patricia, touched my hand with exaggerated gentleness, the way you'd touch someone fragile, someone breaking. "It's okay," she said softly. "These things happen as we get older." I wasn't confused. I was being gaslit. But the performance was so convincing, so coordinated, that even I started questioning myself. Had I mentioned the faucet before? Was my memory failing? Was I becoming the person they said I was? And people believed them, because why wouldn't they? Why would a son lie about his own mother? The doubt they planted in me was almost worse than the theft itself, because when you start questioning your own mind, when you start wondering if maybe they're right and you're the problem, you lose the ability to fight back. You lose your certainty, and without certainty, you have nothing. By the time I discovered what was happening, they'd drained $40,000 from my account. $40,000 I'd saved over decades of careful living, of doing without, of planning for emergencies. Gone. When I confronted Marcus, he didn't even have the decency to look ashamed. I found out because of a declined card at the grocery store. Such a small thing, such an ordinary moment. I was standing in the checkout line at Safeway with a cart full of food for the week, and when the cashier ran my card, it came back declined. Insufficient funds. The embarrassment was immediate and crushing. The people behind me in line shifting impatiently. The cashier's sympathetic but slightly annoyed expression. Me, standing there at 72 years old, unable to pay for groceries when I absolutely knew, there should have been money in that account. "There must be some mistake," I said, my voice shaking. "Can you try it again?" She tried 3 times, each time declined. I left the cart there and drove straight to the bank, my hands trembling on the steering wheel, my mind racing through possibilities. Had there been a fraud? Had someone stolen my identity? Had I somehow miscalculated my balance so badly? The bank teller pulled up my account and her expression changed. "Mrs. Williams," she said carefully, "your account shows multiple large transfers over the past several months to another account with Marcus Williams listed as the account holder." The world tilted. "Marcus is my son," I said. "He's on my account to help me." But he wouldn't. He shouldn't be transferring. "According to these records," she continued, looking more uncomfortable with each word, "he's been withdrawing between $2,000 and $5,000 every 2 weeks for the past 5 months. I did the math in my head. My hands were shaking so badly I had to grip the edge of the counter. "How much is left in my account?" $712. $700, when there should have been over 40,000. I drove home in a daze, called Marcus immediately, and that's when everything fell apart. "You're not thinking clearly, Mom," he said, his voice so calm it made my skin crawl. "This is exactly why we're worried about you. You're getting paranoid, confused. Maybe it's time to think about assisted living." "I saw the bank statements, Marcus. You took $40,000 from my account." "I didn't take anything. That money was used for your care, for your bills, for expenses you can't keep track of anymore. This is what I'm talking about, Mom. You're making accusations that don't make sense. You're losing track of reality." "Don't you dare," I said, my voice breaking. "Don't you dare tell me I'm crazy when you stole from me." "I'm worried about you," he said, and I heard Patricia in the background, murmuring agreement. "We all are. This paranoia, these accusations, this anger. These are signs of cognitive decline. We need to get you help." He hung up, and I stood there in my kitchen, the phone still pressed to my ear, and I realized he'd prepared for this moment. Every weird look at family dinners, every comment about my memory, every instance of manufactured confusion. He'd been building a case against my sanity so that when I discovered the theft, no one would believe me. And he was right. I wasn't confused. I was being robbed. But they'd laid the groundwork so carefully that when I told other family members what was happening, they looked at me with pity. "Poor thing," their eyes said. "She really is losing it." I called my brother Donald next. Surely he'd believe me. We'd grown up together, survived foster care together before Aunt Clara took us in. He knew me. He'd know I wasn't making this up. "Listen," he said, his voice heavy with reluctance. "Marcus called me last week. He's been telling us about some concerning behaviors, and now you're accusing him of stealing? Come on, he's your son. He loves you. Maybe you should get checked out by a doctor just to be safe." "Donald, I have the bank statements right in front of me." Bank statements can be confusing, especially if you're not. If you're having trouble focusing, let Marcus handle this stuff. That's why he's helping you. He didn't believe me. My own brother, who I'd protected when we were kids, who I'd shared a room with in Aunt Clara's tiny apartment, who knew me better than almost anyone. He believed Marcus over me. That's when the loneliness truly set in. The kind of loneliness that makes you question whether you even exist, whether your perceptions have any validity, whether you matter at all. The foreclosure notice arrived on a Tuesday. 3 months behind on the mortgage I didn't know I was behind on because Marcus had been intercepting my mail. 30 days to pay everything I owed or lose my home. I had $700 left in my account, no savings, no backup plan, no one who believed me. I held that notice in my hands for what felt like hours, reading the same words over and over. Notice of default and election to sell under deed of trust. Legal language that translated to one simple truth: I was losing my home. The home where I'd raised my children. The home where my husband had died in my arms. The home that held every memory worth keeping. I tried calling the mortgage company to explain what had happened, that my son had been intercepting payments, that I'd been robbed. The customer service representative was polite but firm. "Ma'am, we need payment within 30 days or we'll proceed with foreclosure. If you believe there's been fraud, you'll need to file a police report and take it up with your bank." File a police report against my own son, against the child I'd nursed through pneumonia when he was 5, against the boy who'd cried in my arms when his father died, against the man who was systematically destroying me. I couldn't do it. Some part of me still hoped this was all a terrible misunderstanding, that Marcus would come to his senses, that my son was still in there somewhere beneath the greed and cruelty. That night, I stood in my kitchen with fresh cornbread cooling on the counter, the smell filling the house the way it had 1,000 times before, when this was a home full of love and laughter instead of a prison closing in around me. I looked at my rosary beads hanging from the bedroom mirror down the hall, and I prayed harder than I'd ever prayed in my life. I prayed for a miracle. I prayed for strength. I prayed for someone, anyone, to believe me. I prayed for my son's soul, twisted as it had become. And I prayed for forgiveness, though I wasn't sure what I was asking forgiveness for. For trusting too much? For loving too deeply? For being naive enough to believe that blood meant something? But God didn't answer, at least not in the way I expected. The police report was the final blow. Marcus knew I had 30 days before foreclosure. He needed to speed up the process, needed to create documentation that I was a danger to myself and others. So someone called 911 and reported a child crying in my non-existent basement. When the police came and found nothing, it went on record. An investigation. Questions about my mental state. A paper trail proving exactly what Marcus needed it to prove. I stood in my doorway that morning, explaining to the officer that I didn't have a basement, that someone had made a false report, and I could see him adding this to the story he'd already heard about me. The crazy old lady who thinks people are stealing from her. The paranoid grandmother making accusations against her devoted son. Now she's having hallucinations about basements and crying children. He was kind about it, but I saw the doubt in his eyes, and I knew I was finished. 2 weeks later, I was packing boxes in silence, my daughter Keisha helping me sort through 40 years of life. She was the only one who believed me, the only one who'd stood by me when everyone else turned away. She'd offered me her spare bedroom because I had nowhere else to go. In 16 days, this house would belong to the bank, and I'd be another statistic. Another elderly woman displaced, discarded, erased. We'd been packing for hours, sorting through memories that now felt tainted by what was happening. Every photograph, every piece of furniture, Every small treasure from my marriage carried the weight of loss. Not just the loss of my husband, but the loss of my dignity, my independence, my sense of safety in the world. "Mama," Keisha said softly, pulling an old accordion file from the back of my closet. "What's this?" I looked up from the box of kitchen towels I was folding. "I don't know, baby. Probably old tax returns or something." She opened it, and I watched her face change. The color drained from her cheeks, then rushed back. Her eyes went wide. Her hands started shaking. "Mama," she whispered, "there's a bank card in here, with your name on it." The world seemed to tilt sideways. I crossed the room and took the envelope from her hands, a bank card I'd never activated, still in its original envelope. My name printed on the card, an account number I didn't recognize, and a letter, paper-clipped to the envelope, in handwriting I knew as well as my own. My great-aunt's handwriting. Aunt Clara, who'd been dead for almost a decade, though it felt like yesterday. My hand started shaking before I even opened it. Keisha steadied me, helped me sit on the edge of the bed, and I read the words that would change everything. "Little B," it said, and I started crying immediately because no one had called me that since she died. "If you're reading this, you've hit the bottom." She knew. Somehow, across all those years, she'd known this day would come. The letter continued in her familiar scrawl, the loops and curves of her handwriting bringing her voice back so vividly I could almost hear her speaking the words aloud. "I've been poor. I've been alone. I've been the person nobody wanted, nobody valued, nobody protected. I know what it feels like to wonder if you'll make it through another day. I know what it feels like when the people who should love you turn their backs instead. I also know you, little B. I know you'll give everything you have to the people you love, even when they don't deserve it. I know you'll trust when you should question. I know you'll sacrifice yourself to keep the peace. And I know that someday, someone will take advantage of that beautiful, terrible generosity of yours. I can't stop them from hurting you. I can't protect you from betrayal. But I can make sure you survive it. I can make sure that when you hit the bottom, there's something there to catch you." I couldn't read any more right then. My vision was blurred with tears, my throat closed with emotion I couldn't name. Grief and hope tangled together so tightly I couldn't tell them apart. Keisha took the letter gently from my hands and read it aloud while I sobbed. "I knew this day might come. I grew up in foster care too. I know what it means to have nothing and no one. This is my last joke with you, the best one. I made sure you'd never be helpless. Queen B is still looking out for you. The account information is below. It's yours. It always was." Queen B, our secret name for her, our private joke that no one else understood. She'd called me Little B because I never stopped moving, always buzzing around trying to fix everything for everyone. I'd called her Queen B, and she'd laugh that deep, knowing laugh that I'd saved on an old phone just so I could hear it when I missed her most. Aunt Clara had raised me after my mother abandoned me to foster care when I was 7. She'd taken me in when no one else wanted me, worked 2 jobs to keep me fed and clothed, given me the only real home I'd ever known before this house. When she died, she had nothing. She'd lived simply in a tiny apartment, saved nothing I could see, left me only her costume jewelry and her recipe box. Or so I thought. "Mama," Keisha said, her voice shaking, "we need to call this bank right now." I couldn't dial the number. My hands were trembling too badly. Keisha did it for me, put the phone on speaker, and held my hand while we waded through the automated menu, through the hold music, through the security questions that verified my identity 3 times. Each moment of waiting felt like an eternity. What if the account didn't exist? What if it had been closed years ago? What if this was just one more cruel joke in a life that had become nothing but cruelty? Then the representative said the words that split my world in half. "Mrs. Williams, this is a retirement fund with you listed as the emergency contact and heir. The current balance is $78,000. The room went silent. I heard the words, but couldn't process them. 78,000. That couldn't be right. Aunt Clara worked as a seamstress and a house cleaner. She lived in a studio apartment with furniture from thrift stores. She wore the same 3 dresses for 20 years. How could she have $78,000? I couldn't breathe, couldn't speak, couldn't process what I'd just heard. $78,000. Exactly what I needed to pay off the foreclosure. Exactly enough to save my home and have money left over to actually live on. Exactly the amount that would let me tell Marcus and Sharon and Donald and everyone who'd betrayed me that they'd gotten nothing, that their conspiracy had failed, that I was still here and still standing. "Ma'am," the representative said, "are you still there?" "We're coming to the bank," Keisha said, her voice fierce with protective love. "Right now. We're coming to verify this in person." She drove me straight there, neither of us speaking because there were no words big enough for what we were feeling. The silence in the car was heavy with shock, with disbelief, with the dawning realization that we'd just been handed a miracle. I kept touching the envelope in my lap, making sure it was real, making sure I hadn't imagined the whole thing, making sure that when we got to the bank, they wouldn't tell us there'd been some mistake, some error, some cruel misunderstanding. When we walked into the bank, I was still wearing my packing clothes, my hair unwashed, my face swollen from crying. The manager took one look at us and asked us to sit down before showing us the account balance. He was a kind man in his 50s with graying hair and gentle eyes. He'd seen us walk in, seen the state we were in, and he'd understood immediately that something significant was happening. He turned his computer screen toward us, and there it was. Real, documented, mine. $78,001. The number sat there on the screen, solid and undeniable. I stared at it until my eyes burned, until Keisha squeezed my hand so hard it hurt, until the reality of it finally penetrated the fog of disbelief. I broke down in that office, sobbing so hard I couldn't breathe, and the manager quietly handed me a box of tissues while Keisha held me and cried too. Not because of the money itself, though God knows we needed it desperately, but because Aunt Clara had known. Because she'd been planning this for years, putting away $20 here, $50 there, living in that cramped apartment and working those 2 jobs while building me a safety net for the day when I'd need her most, and she wouldn't be there to hold me. She'd died almost a decade ago, but she'd saved me one final time. The manager explained that she'd set up the account 23 years ago, right after I got married. She'd been adding to it steadily, a little each month, listing me as the sole beneficiary with instructions that I wasn't to know about it unless I specifically asked or unless the account was flagged for inheritance after her death. But she'd died so suddenly, and the account had fallen through the cracks of probate, sitting there all these years waiting for me to find it. She was incredibly specific in her instructions, the manager said, pulling up the account notes. She came in every month, sometimes with as little as $15, sometimes with $100. She never missed a payment in 23 years. And every time she came in, she asked us to confirm that the beneficiary information was correct, that you would be able to access this if you needed it. I thought about her making those monthly trips to the bank, her purse clutched tight because she was carrying money she could barely afford to set aside. I thought about her working extra shifts, taking on extra clients, living on next to nothing so she could build this safety net for me. 23 years, hundreds of deposits, thousands of dollars saved one painful sacrifice at a time. She left a note in the account file, the manager said, pulling out a piece of paper. It says, "Don't tell her unless she needs it. She'll need it eventually. They all do." They all do. She meant foster kids. Kids like us who grew up with nothing and no one. Kids who learned early that family isn't always the people who share your blood. She knew that someday I might find myself alone again, betrayed again, with nowhere to turn. And she'd made sure that when that day came, I'd have options. I had options. For the first time in 8 months, I had actual options. You need to understand what that money meant. It wasn't about being rich. It was about being believed. It was about proof that I wasn't crazy, wasn't confused, wasn't making things up. It was about having the power to say no to people who'd assumed I had no choice but to accept their abuse. That afternoon we paid off the entire foreclosure. Every penny I owed, plus the fees and penalties. The house was mine, free and clear, for the first time since 1981. No more mortgage, no more threat of losing it. Walking out of the bank that day felt surreal. The sun was shining, people were going about their normal lives, and I was carrying a receipt that proved I'd just saved my home. The world looked different. The air smelled sweeter. Even the traffic noise sounded like music. Then Keisha drove me to an elder law attorney her friend had recommended. A professional who actually listened, who believed me, who understood immediately what had been done to me. We spent 3 hours in his office documenting everything. Every transfer Marcus had made, every forged signature, every piece of the conspiracy. His name was Robert Chen, and he'd been practicing elder law for 20 years. He'd seen cases like mine before, he said, though each one made him angry all over again. "Mrs. Williams," the attorney said, "what they did to you is financial elder abuse. It's a crime. We can prosecute." I thought about Marcus in court, having to explain why he'd stolen from his own mother. Thought about Sharon and Donald and everyone who'd participated facing consequences. Thought about justice. But then I thought about Aunt Clara. About her voice on that old voicemail I still played sometimes just to hear her laugh. About her letter. About the way she'd protected me quietly, without drama, without revenge, just pure love translated into action. "I want my money back," I said. "Whatever you can recover, I want it. But I don't want to prosecute. I just want them out of my life." The attorney nodded. "We can do that." It took 4 months, but we recovered 32,000 of the 40,000 Marcus had stolen. Not all of it, but enough. Enough to make it clear that his plan had failed. Enough to make it clear that I had resources and representation, and I wasn't the helpless victim he'd assumed I was. The legal process was slow and painful. Each deposition, each document review, each piece of evidence we uncovered was like peeling back layers of betrayal. But Robert Chen was patient and thorough, and he made sure every dollar Marcus had stolen was accounted for, traced, documented. I didn't have to tell the family what had happened. Word spread on its own the way it always does in families, like wildfire through dry grass. Marcus heard first, of course. Came to my door demanding to know where I'd gotten money to pay off the foreclosure. It was a Saturday afternoon when he showed up, unannounced, his face red with anger and confusion. I saw him pull up in his car, saw him slam the door, saw him march up my walkway like he owned the place, like he still had any right to be here. I stood on my porch, on my property that was now entirely mine, and I looked at my son the way you look at a stranger. Because that's what he'd become. A stranger who wore my child's face but had nothing of my child's heart. "Mom, what the hell is going on?" he demanded. "The bank called me. They said the foreclosure was paid off. Where did you get that kind of money?" "That's none of your business," I said calmly. "You need to leave now." "None of my business? I'm your son. I've been trying to help you, trying to take care of you, and this is how you repay me? By accusing me of stealing? By shutting me out?" His audacity took my breath away. Even now, even caught, he was still lying. Still playing the victim. "You stole $40,000 from me," I said, my voice steady even though my hands were shaking. "You conspired with Sharon and Donald to make me look incompetent so you could take my house. You filed a false police report. You systematically destroyed my reputation and my relationships. And you did it all while pretending to care about me. Mom, don't be ridiculous. We're family." "No," I said. "Family doesn't steal. Family doesn't lie. Family doesn't conspire to make you homeless. Whatever you are, you're not my family anymore." I closed the door in his face, locked it, went back to my kitchen where fresh cornbread was cooling on the counter because I could afford groceries again, because I could afford to live again, because Aunt Clara had made sure I'd never be helpless. I heard him bang on the door a few more times, heard him shouting, heard him finally give up and drive away. And I sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I'd signed those papers trusting him, and I felt the weight of his betrayal settle into something manageable. something I could carry without being crushed by it. That night, I sat in the darkness of my bedroom and played the voicemail one more time. Her voice filled the room, warm and alive and so impossibly precious. "Little B," her recording said, "it's Queen B. Just calling to say I love you. Call me back when you get a chance." I'll never be able to call her back. But she'd called me one final time anyway, across death itself, across almost a decade of silence, and she'd said the only thing that mattered: "I love you. I'm protecting you. You're not alone." The aftermath unfolded exactly as karma always does. When Marcus, Sharon, and Donald learned I'd paid off the house and recovered most of my stolen money, they realized they'd get nothing. The conspiracy that had united them fell apart. They turned on each other, each one blaming the others for the failed plan, for the money they'd counted on that would never come. Sharon accused Marcus of lying about my mental state. Donald accused Sharon of pushing the idea in the first place. Marcus's wife filed for divorce when she realized he'd tanked their reputation in the family for nothing. They destroyed each other far more thoroughly than I ever could have. I heard about it from Keisha, who stayed in touch with certain cousins. Marcus and Patricia's divorce was ugly, she said. Patricia had found out about the stolen money and realized she could be implicated. She took the kids and moved across the country. Sharon and her husband were barely speaking because he'd found out she'd been planning to use her share of my house money to pay off her credit card debt. Donald's wife left him when she discovered he'd been lying about the whole thing. I didn't have to lift a finger. I didn't have to say a word. I just watched from a distance as the truth did what truth always does eventually. It came out, and it burned everything it touched. The rest of the family started reaching out, apologizing for believing the lies, asking if I was okay. Some of the apologies felt genuine. Most felt like people covering their own guilt, making sure I knew they hadn't been part of the conspiracy, even though they'd believed it readily enough when it was convenient. I accepted the apologies with grace, but I didn't forget. You don't forget the people who abandoned you when you needed them most. You don't forget who stood by you and who turned away. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It means choosing not to let their betrayal define your future, even while remembering exactly what they were capable of doing to you in your darkest moment. Keisha stood by me. My daughter who'd helped me pack boxes, who'd driven me to the bank, who'd believed me when no one else would. She was family. The others were just people I used to know. Within 6 months, I made a decision that Aunt Clara would have loved. I sold the Oakland house. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to. Because that house had become a museum of betrayal, and I didn't want to live in a museum anymore. Every room held memories now that were tainted. The kitchen where Marcus had brought me lunch while lying to my face. The living room where the family had gathered to gaslight me. The bedroom where I'd cried myself to sleep night after night, wondering if I was really losing my mind. The house that had once whispered my husband's voice now echoed with Marcus's lies. The decision to sell wasn't easy. I spent weeks walking through each room, touching the walls, remembering what had been. The growth chart marks on the doorframe where I'd measured Marcus and Keisha every birthday. The scuff mark on the living room wall from when Marcus crashed his bike indoors at age 8. The loose floorboard in the hallway that my husband had always meant to fix but never did, and now I'd kept it loose on purpose because it reminded me of his voice saying, "I'll get to it this weekend, honey." But those memories belonged to people who didn't exist anymore. The little boy who'd crashed his bike was gone, replaced by a man who'd tried to steal my home. The husband who'd promised to fix things was gone, leaving me alone to face our son's betrayal. The life I'd built in these walls had been demolished from the inside out. So I let it go, not with bitterness, but with a kind of peaceful resignation. The house was just wood and nails and memories. The real home had always been the people, and those people were either gone or had shown themselves to be strangers wearing familiar faces. I sold it for a good price, the market still strong. And I took that money along with what Aunt Clara had left me, and I bought a small condo in the city where Keisha lived with her children, my grandchildren, the babies who didn't care about property values or inheritance. They just wanted their grandma to read them stories and make them cornbread and tell them about the old days when their great-great-Aunt Clara was still alive. I moved in 3 weeks before Christmas. Keisha helped me unpack, and this time there was laughter instead of silence. This time, we were building something instead of losing it. But the move wasn't the real change. The real change was what I did with my purpose. You see, having money didn't just save my home. It gave me time to think about what mattered. Time to remember who I was before the conspiracy, before the fear, before I became someone who jumped every time the phone rang. I remembered that I was little B. I remembered that Aunt Clara had saved me from foster care. I remembered all those years of being unwanted, of being shuffled between homes, of being a burden that everyone was eager to pass along to someone else. And I remembered that there were children right now, this very moment, feeling exactly what I'd felt, wondering if anyone would ever choose them, wondering if love was real or just something that happened to other people. I started volunteering at the Foster Care Advocacy Center 3 days a week. They needed people who understood, who'd lived it, who could look these kids in the eye and say with absolute certainty, "This isn't forever. You will survive this. You will find your people." The first day I walked into that center, I was terrified. What did I have to offer these kids? I was just an old woman who'd barely survived her own disasters, who'd almost lost everything, who still carried the scars of betrayal like weights in my chest. But then I met Jasmine, a 7-year-old girl with braids and big eyes who reminded me so much of myself at that age it hurt. "Are you a foster kid too?" she asked me directly, no hesitation. "I was," I told her, "a long time ago." "Did you find a forever home?" "I did. My Aunt Clara took me in when I was your age, and you know what? She changed my whole life." Jasmine thought about this. "Do you think I'll find a forever home?" I knelt down to her level, looked her right in the eyes, and told her the truth. "I think you're going to find exactly what you need, exactly when you need it. And until then, I'll be here every Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday. You can count on that." She did count on it. They all did. And I showed up every time, without fail. I became the person I'd needed when I was 7. I became the person Aunt Clara had been for me. The kids there don't know my story. They don't know about Marcus or the conspiracy or the money. They just know I show up. Every Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday, I'm there. I help with homework. I teach cooking classes. I listen when they need to talk, and I'm silent when they need space. And every Christmas, I make sure every single child in that center gets a present. A real present, not charity bin leftovers, but something chosen specifically for them. A skateboard for the kid who loves tricks, art supplies for the girl who draws on everything, books for the boy who reads under his covers with a flashlight after lights out. Last Christmas, I spent $3,000 on presents for 42 kids. Keisha helped me shop, helped me wrap, helped me deliver them. And when we watched those kids open their gifts on Christmas morning, when we saw their faces light up with the realization that someone had actually seen them, had actually cared enough to pick out something just for them, I felt Aunt Clara's presence so strongly I almost turned around expecting to see her standing there. I do it because I was one of those kids once. I do it because Aunt Clara did it for me. I do it because her legacy doesn't end with saving my house. Her legacy lives on in every child who opens a present on Christmas morning and knows that someone, somewhere, thought they mattered. This is what inheritance really means. Not money, not property, but the love that keeps protecting you long after the person who loved you is gone. Aunt Clara's been dead almost a decade, but she saved me at 72 the same way she saved me at 7. By seeing me, by knowing me, by making sure I'd never be helpless again. Some nights I still sit in my condo and play that voicemail. Her voice fills the room and I close my eyes and I can almost feel her presence. Little B, it's Queen B, just calling to say I love you. I can't call her back, but I answer her anyway, in my own way, every single day. I answer by showing up, by helping kids who need what we needed, by making sure her love doesn't stop with me but multiplies outward. touching lives she'll never meet, but somehow always knew were waiting. This is the part where I need you to really listen, because what happened to me is happening right now to someone you know. Maybe to you. Elder abuse isn't rare, it's epidemic. In Mexico, studies indicate that 1 in 3 seniors suffers some form of mistreatment. 1 in 3. Those aren't just numbers. Those are grandmothers and grandfathers, people who raised families and built lives, being betrayed by the very people they sacrificed everything for. And it starts young. The trauma compounds across generations. Research with teenagers shows that 75% had at least one trauma. 20% had 4 or more. We're raising children in crisis, and those children grow up to perpetuate the crisis on their own parents. The warning signs are clear if you know what to look for. When family members suddenly want access to your accounts, when they start managing your finances without clear documentation, when they isolate you from other family members or friends, when they tell stories about your declining mental state that don't match your own experience, when they push for power of attorney or changes to your will. These are red flags. These are the patterns that signal danger. If you're experiencing this, document everything. Take photos of statements, record conversations if your state allows it. Tell someone outside the family what's happening. Contact Adult Protective Services or an elder law attorney. Don't wait until you're 30 days from foreclosure like I was. And if you're not experiencing this but you know someone who might be, check on them. Actually check on them, not just a text or a phone call, but an in-person visit where you look them in the eye and ask if they're okay. Create space for them to tell you the truth. Because isolation is the weapon abusers use most effectively. They cut you off from everyone who might believe you, who might help you, who might interfere with their plans. Don't let them succeed. Aunt Clara couldn't stop what Marcus did to me, but she made sure I'd survive it. She couldn't protect me from betrayal, but she could protect me from being destroyed by it. That's what real love does. It plans ahead. It thinks about the worst-case scenario and makes provisions. It doesn't assume you'll always be there to help, so it creates systems that work even after death. If you love someone, if you truly love them, don't just tell them. Protect them. Put things in writing. Create accounts they can access in emergencies. Leave letters that explain your intentions. Make sure that if the worst happens, they'll know they weren't alone. They were loved. They were remembered. They mattered. That's Aunt Clara's legacy to me. And that's the legacy I'm trying to pass forward. Not money, though money helps, but the knowledge that love doesn't end, that protection can last forever, that even when you're gone, you can still save the people you love. I'm 72 years old. I live in a small condo near my daughter and grandchildren. I volunteer 3 days a week with foster kids. Every Christmas, I make sure they get presents. Every day, I wake up grateful to still be here, still be standing, still be fighting. Marcus doesn't speak to me anymore. Sharon moved to Arizona. Donald sends awkward birthday cards that I don't respond to. The rest of the family maintains polite distance, uncomfortable with their own complicity in what almost happened to me. I don't miss any of them. You can't miss people who never actually saw you, who never actually valued you beyond what you could provide them. But I miss Aunt Clara every single day. I miss her laugh. I miss her cooking. I miss the way she'd look at me and know exactly what I was thinking before I said it. I miss our secret language, our inside jokes, our late-night conversations about everything and nothing. She's been gone almost a decade, and sometimes it feels like yesterday. Sometimes I turn to tell her something and remember she's not there anymore. Sometimes I hear her voice in my head so clearly, I'm certain she's standing right behind me. But she's not behind me. She's ahead of me, showing me the way, teaching me how to love people across time and space, and even death itself. Queen Bee kept her promise. She made sure I'd never be helpless. And now I'm keeping my promise to her. I'm making sure other kids, other elders, other people who've been discarded and betrayed know they're not alone. This is what I want you to take from my story. Not the drama, not the conspiracy, not even the miraculous discovery of money I didn't know existed. I want you to take the love. The kind of love that plans ahead. The kind of love that protects. The kind of love that says, I may not be here, but I'm still watching over you, still making sure you'll be okay. If you've lost someone who loved you like that, honor them. Live the life they wanted for you. Help the people they would have helped. Be the proof that their love didn't end when their life did. And if you haven't lost them yet, if they're still here, tell them. Tell them what they mean to you. Ask them how they want to be remembered. Make plans together for the worst-case scenarios. Create the safety nets while you can, because you won't always be able to. I'm sitting here in my condo on a quiet Sunday afternoon, the fans spinning lazily overhead because summer in California never really ends. There's fresh cornbread cooling on the counter. My rosary beads are hanging in the bedroom. My grandchildren are coming over later for dinner. This is the life Aunt Clara gave me. Not once, but twice. And I'm living it as fully as I can, for as long as I can, because she deserves to see that her love didn't fail, that her protection worked, that little bee survived because Queen Bee never stopped watching over her. So let me ask you something. Where are you listening to this from? Are you alone like I was, wondering if anyone sees you? Are you safe like I am now, grateful for another day? Are you somewhere in between, fighting battles nobody knows about? Wherever you are, whatever you're facing, I need you to know this. You matter. Your life has value beyond what you can provide other people. And somewhere, someone loved you enough to want you to survive. Find that love. Honor it. Pass it forward. Because that's how we survive. Not alone. Never alone. But wrapped in love that transcends death itself, protected by people who saw us and knew us and made sure we'd never be helpless. That's my story. That's Aunt Clara's legacy. That's the inheritance that truly matters. If this resonated with you, if you know someone who needs to hear it, share it. Talk about it. Break the silence around elder abuse. Break the silence around foster care trauma. Break the silence around the kind of betrayal that happens behind closed doors in families that look perfect from the outside. And if you want to hear more stories like this, stories about survival and love and the unexpected ways we're saved, subscribe. Stay with me. Let's keep talking about the things that matter, because we're not alone. We were never alone. We're all little bees, buzzing around trying to survive, and somewhere out there are queen bees making sure we make it. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being here. Thank you for believing that love doesn't end and protection lasts forever. Now go call someone you love. Tell them what they mean to you. Make sure they know that if the worst happens, they won't be alone. Queen Bee made sure of it for me. Make sure of it for them.